February 2023, Cape Town, the Women's T20 World Cup final. South Africa, a team that didn't even play international cricket for 25 years because of apartheid, a team that returned to the global stage in 1997 and spent the next decade struggling to be competitive, is standing in an ICC World Cup final for the first time in their history. The crowd at Newlands is 14,000 strong. The atmosphere is electric. The nation is watching. They lose to Australia, narrowly, heartbreakingly. 18 months later, they reach another T20 World Cup final. And a year later, it's the final of the sports pinnacle, the ODI World Cup. Something fundamental has changed in South African women's cricket over the last decade. And the fact that most of the world is only just noticing is exactly why we need to talk about it. Today, we're breaking down why the Proteas women are quietly becoming one of the most dangerous teams in the world and what has actually driven that rise from the inside. The South African women's team actually made their test debut in 1960, becoming the fourth women's team in the world to play test cricket after Australia, England and New Zealand. They had real cricketing infrastructure, even if it was almost entirely limited to the white minority. Then came the sporting boycott. Between 1972 and 1997, their women's team played no international cricket at all. And when they finally returned to international cricket, the gap was enormous. They were behind not just in results, but in infrastructure, in coaching, in the depth of the women's game. And crucially, the apartheid era had created a sport that was almost entirely white, meaning that the country's enormous diverse population of potential cricketers had never had the chance to play at any level. That is the starting point for the story. If you want to understand South Africa's rising trajectory, we will have to look at the system that's churned out these stars. A system that has been rebuilt from scratch over the last decade. The first wave of professionalization occurred in 2013, when 6 players were offered central contracts. From there, to the launch of the professional domestic women's league in 2023, the change has been monumental. They brought together the Women's One Day Cup and the Women's T20 Challenge under a properly funded, properly structured competition. The number of permanent contracts per Division 1 team was raised from 6 to 11 players. Each of the 6 teams got a full-time head coach, an assistant coach, a physiotherapist, and a strength and conditioning coach. A sport can only grow if the change is bottom-up, not top-down. And for that, you need to invest at the grassroots level. CSA's Hub program now operates 70 hubs across townships and rural areas around the country, with over 6,400 cricketers participating and 203 full-time coaching staff. The explicit goal is to open the game up to communities that were excluded from cricket entirely under apartheid. KFC mini cricket leagues have become extremely popular amongst young girls. The pipeline is being built from the ground up. Following the historic run to the 2023 T20 World Cup final, the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture committed over 22.5 million rand across a 3-year cycle specifically to women and girls cricket development programs. This included a 7.5 million rand incentive for the international women's team, as well as 15 million rand for Cricket South Africa to invest in a professional women's cricket league during this tenure. That's not transformational money on its own, but it's a sign of political will alongside institutional investment. There is also the CSA Emerging Academy running every year at the Centre of Excellence in Tshwane, taking the most promising young players from provincial and under-19 cricket and putting them through elite high-performance training, a direct conveyor belt from junior cricket to the national team. Kayla Reneker, who will be playing her first senior ICC World Cup in 2026, came through this system. She averaged 53 with the bat and took 5 wickets in her first 9 T20Is. She's the product of a pipeline that simply didn't exist 15 years ago. Here's something that gets underreported in conversations about South Africa's rise: the impact of franchise cricket. The explosion of women's T20 leagues around the world has had a disproportionate benefit for South African players, because a South African women's cricketer in 2026 has much greater access to world-class training environments and competition for extended periods year on year. Laura Wolfart and Maizan Cup both played an integral part for the Delhi Capitals in the WPL, with the former being bought at the auction for INR 1.1 crores and later being signed for £75,000 by the sister franchise in the 100, Southern Brave. The marquee all-rounder meanwhile had been retained by Delhi for INR 2.2 crores ahead of the 2026 season and was signed by the London Spirit for £130,000 in the 100. Shabnam Ismail, even after retiring from international cricket, stayed active in the WBBL, the 100 and the WPL, which is precisely why she could walk back into the national setup at 37 and still be a genuine weapon. This is the compound effect that the big cricket nations sometimes take for granted. If you're Australian or English, you get a lead domestic competition and you pick and choose which franchise leagues to participate in. If you're South African, every competitive season outside of home cricket is a learning environment you couldn't access before. Playing alongside and against the best players in the world in conditions you'd face at ICC tournaments. Meg Lanning, Nat Sciver-Brunt or Smriti Mandana aren't players anymore that South Africa's women read about in a magazine. They're teammates and opponents in franchise cricket every single year. Even if you look past the popular Globetrotters, this is no longer a team dependent on just a couple of match winners. Annika Bosch played a fantastic knock in the 2024 semi-final to help the Proteas go past the defending champions Australia in Dubai, while Tasman Brits scored 5 ODI runs in 2025. The joint most by a South African woman in a calendar year. The experienced Sunnilis has also been a bang for them in the last 18 months or so, averaging 45 and striking at 87 in ODIs. On the bowling front too, there's the experience of Ayabonga Khaka and Nonkululeko Malaba, with Ayanda Hlubi and Nondumi Sushangase also chipping in whenever they've gotten the chances. There's also Nadine de Klerk, who has time and again proven her worth in every department, and a certain Annette Dirksen, who's being touted to be Maizan Kaap's successor as a future South African superstar. Now, I want to be honest here, because the full story of South African women's cricket is not just a celebration. Making the sport genuinely accessible to all communities, particularly black South African women, is still a work in progress. Cricket has historically been a sport for a very narrow demographic in South Africa, and the women's game carries those legacy issues just as the men's game. While the CSA Hub program is a genuine attempt to change that, they themselves have acknowledged the challenges: insufficient facilities, transport costs, financial constraints limiting expansion. The professional domestic league is a step forward, but a women's franchise T20 league, the kind that has turbocharged development in Australia, England and India, doesn't yet exist in South Africa. That is a gap that will need to close if this trajectory has to be sustained. Players themselves have been vocal about this. Sunnilis, after the launch to Australia in the 2023 World Cup final, spoke about having done our best to give the girls in the country the best possible chance. Hopefully, we get an SA20 for us as well. Unfortunately, Graham Smith, the SA20 commissioner, has made it clear that there are no plans to start a women's SA20. He cited a busy schedule for the women and the presence of 3 other established franchise leagues as a roadblock. One can only hope that things change quickly. And there are resource questions that keep coming back. South Africa have been one of only 4 nations who've consistently played red ball cricket in the last few years. However, there's still no domestic multi-day tournament for them to understand the rigors of the longest format. Their skipper Laura Wolfhard went as far as to say that they must incorporate red ball into domestic cricket or just leave it altogether. The team on the field has overachieved relative to the investment put behind them. The next stage of growth requires the investment to catch up. Here is what makes South Africa genuinely exciting heading into the next cycle of ICC cricket. They have stars who've been in ICC finals and know what it takes to get there. Wolfhard, Kaap and Ismail are all players who've been in the pressure cooker and come out sharper. That experience is genuinely rare. And now, they have youth arriving behind the experience. Kayla Reineke, the former South African under-19 captain, and Annette Dirksen, who was named the ICC Emerging Women's Cricketer of the Year in 2024, and other such options such as the leggy Sejni Naidu coming up the ranks. The head coach Mandla Mashimbi has spoken openly about the 4-1 T20I series win against India at home as a confidence-building statement, and about still looking for the final pieces. Importantly, a lot of these matches have seen the crowds fill up the stadium. Young South African girls wearing Proteas jerseys in matches leads to more girls picking up a batter ball, and more girls wanting to be the next Laura Wolfhard or Maizan Kaap. The loop has started, and once it starts, it's very hard to stop. South African women's cricket team is one of the great stories in the sport right now. It is also a story that is unfinished. But here's what I know. A team that has reached 3 ICC finals in 3 years is not just quietly becoming a powerhouse. It already is one. It's just the rest of us that are only catching up to it now. Subscribe to Women's Cricket Central if you want the stories that matter in women's cricket told properly. And drop a comment below. Do you think South Africa can finally break the trophy jinx in women's cricket in 2026? Until then, see you in the next one.